No one cared about the sick billionaire until the maid's toddler did something that left everyone in tears. I wasn't sure I'd ever tell this story, but something happened in that house that I still think about every single day. A man who had everything, the money, the mansion, the name everyone recognized, was lying in bed, sick, and not one person in that house came to check on him. Not his staff, not his family. Nobody, except a 3-year-old girl in a red dress, holding a bowl of soup too heavy for her tiny hands. What she did next didn't just save him. It changed him. And by the end of the story, it might change you too. Hey, welcome back. Before we start, tell me in the comments, which country are you watching from today? I love seeing where you all are from. Today's story is one of the most emotional ones I've shared in a while, about a sick billionaire nobody bothered to care for, and the tiny act of love from a child that no one expected. Stay with me till the end, because this one has a twist you won't see coming. Nobody in the Whitfield mansion noticed when Daniel stopped coming down for breakfast. That was the first thing that struck Rosa Alvarez as strange, though she didn't say anything about it at first. She wasn't paid to notice things like that. She was paid to clean, to cook, to keep the enormous house on the hill running quietly while the man who owned it ran an empire from a phone glued to his ear. Daniel Whitfield was 34 years old, and by every measure that mattered to the outside world, he had already won. Real estate towers with his name on them. A private jet he barely used. A net worth that made headlines every time Forbes updated their list. But Rosa had worked in that house for 2 years, and in 2 years, she had learned something nobody printed in those magazines. Daniel Whitfield was the loneliest man she had ever met. It was a Tuesday morning in early spring when she first noticed the light under his bedroom door hadn't turned off since the night before. She knocked softly. No answer. She knocked again, a little louder this time, her knuckles rapping against the heavy oak door that seemed far too grand for a bedroom. Mr. Whitfield? Nothing. She pushed the door open just enough to peek inside, and what she saw made her stomach drop. Daniel was lying sideways across the bed, still in yesterday's clothes, a thin sheen of sweat on his forehead. His face was pale, almost gray, and when she stepped closer, she could see he was shivering despite the warmth of the room. Mr. Whitfield, she said again, rushing to his side now. Are you all right? He opened his eyes halfway, and for a second, he looked at her like he didn't recognize where he was. Rosa, he mumbled. I think I need a doctor. She called immediately. The house doctor came within the hour, checked him over, and diagnosed a severe case of the flu that had spiraled into something worse because, as the doctor put it, shaking his head, you've clearly been ignoring this for days, Mr. Whitfield. Your body finally gave out. A small cut above his eyebrow, from where he'd apparently fainted and hit the corner of his desk sometime in the night, needed a bandage. He'd been so out of it he hadn't even called for help. Rosa stood in the doorway of that grand bedroom, arms crossed, watching the doctor pack up his bag, and felt something twist inside her chest. This man owned 4 houses. He employed over 200 people across his companies. And he had been lying alone on his bedroom floor for who knows how many hours, and not a single person had known. Where was his family? She knew the answer, of course. She'd worked there long enough to piece it together from overheard phone calls, and the framed photos that never got dusted because nobody ever really looked at them. Daniel's parents had passed years ago. His only brother lived overseas, and the two hadn't spoken in what sounded like years. Not since some falling out over the family business that Rosa never got the full story on. There was an ex-fiancé whose photo used to sit on his dresser until it didn't anymore. Now it was just him, in that enormous house, with a staff of people who kept things clean and running but who, Rosa realized with a sinking feeling, had never once been told to actually check on him. That afternoon, word went around the staff quarters that Mr. Whitfield was sick and needed rest. His assistant, a sharply dressed woman named Claire, poked her head in once to drop off a stack of documents for when he's feeling better, set them on the nightstand without so much as a glance at his face, and left. The chef sent up a tray of soup through one of the junior staff, who left it outside the door because Daniel hadn't answered when they knocked, and nobody thought to check twice. By evening, the tray was still sitting there, untouched, going cold. Rosa felt her frustration rising, but she also understood. in a way that made her sad rather than angry. This was what wealth did sometimes. It surrounded a person with people whose job was to serve him, but not necessarily to care about him. There was a difference, and somewhere along the way, everyone in that house, herself included if she was honest, had gotten used to treating Daniel Whitfield like a fixture of the house rather than a person who might, on some ordinary Tuesday, simply need somebody to sit with him. It was her daughter who reminded her of that difference. Amara was 3 years old, with a cloud of curly hair her mother tied up every morning and a stubborn streak that showed itself the moment she could walk. Rosa didn't have anyone to watch her most days, so on the days it couldn't be helped, Amara came to work with her, tucked into a corner of the staff room with a coloring book, told firmly to stay put and be quiet. Most days she did. She was a good girl that way. But that evening, when Rosa went to collect the cold, untouched tray of soup from outside Mr. Whitfield's door, Amara had slipped away from the staff room and followed her down the long hallway without her mother noticing, her small socked feet silent against the marble floor. "Mama," Amara whispered, tugging at her mother's sleeve as Rosa bent to pick up the tray. "Is the man sick?" Rosa startled, turning to find her daughter standing there, wide-eyed, staring at the closed bedroom door like it held some kind of mystery. "Amara, baby, you're supposed to be in the staff room." "Is he sick?" Amara asked again, more insistent this time, in the way 3-year-olds are when they've decided something matters. Rosa sighed, too tired to argue. "Yes, baby. Mr. Whitfield is sick." Amara looked at the door for a long moment, her small face scrunched in thought, the way it did when she was working something out in her head that adults had long since stopped wondering about. "Who's taking care of him?" The question landed harder than Rosa expected. She opened her mouth to answer. "The doctor came." She wanted to say, "There's soup right here," but the words didn't come because she realized, standing there in that hallway with the cold tray in her hands, that she didn't actually have a good answer. Nobody was taking care of him. Not really. People were servicing him. There was a difference, and her daughter, 3 years old, had somehow asked the one question that cut straight to the heart of it. "I don't know, sweetheart," Rosa admitted quietly. "Come on, let's get you back to the staff room." But Amara didn't move. She was still looking at that door, and something in her small face had settled into a kind of quiet determination that Rosa would only fully understand the next morning, when she woke to find her daughter's spot in the staff room empty, and the sound of small footsteps and a slightly too heavy bowl of soup making its slow, careful way down the hallway toward a door that, for 2 days, nobody else had bothered to knock on twice. The door was heavier than Amara expected. She pushed against it with both hands, the bowl of soup balanced precariously in the crook of one arm, some of it sloshing dangerously close to the rim. She had watched her mother carry trays 100 times and had decided, in the simple logic of a 3-year-old, that this was something she could do too. Nobody had told her not to. Nobody had thought to. The door creaked open, and there he was, Daniel Whitfield, one of the wealthiest men in the country, curled beneath a mountain of silk blankets, his face pale against the pillow, a damp cloth that had long since gone warm still resting on his forehead from whatever the doctor had left the night before. He stirred at the sound of the door, blinking against the morning light, and for a moment he thought he was dreaming. A small girl in a nightgown stood in his doorway, holding a bowl of soup with the kind of fierce concentration usually reserved for defusing a bomb. "You're sick," Amara said matter-of-factly, as if this settled the matter of whether she belonged there. Daniel pushed himself up slightly, wincing at the effort. Yes. I am." "Who?" "I brought soup." She walked toward the bed with slow, careful steps, eyes fixed on the bowl like it might betray her. When she reached the edge of the mattress, she realized, with the dawning horror of a child encountering an unsolvable problem, that the bed was far too tall for her to climb while holding anything. She set the bowl down on the floor, climbed onto the small step stool that sat by the nightstand, the one the staff used to reach the higher shelves, dragged it closer to the bed with a grunt of effort, and then went back for the bowl. Daniel watched this entire operation in stunned silence, too weak and too bewildered to do anything but observe. When she finally made it up, kneeling on the edge of the mattress, she held the bowl toward him with both hands. "It's warm. Mama makes the best soup. It'll make you feel better." Where's your mother? Daniel asked, his voice hoarse.
Sleeping.
She works too much. Amara said this the way children say true things without understanding the weight of them. Open your mouth. He almost laughed, except laughing hurt, and except something about the absurd sincerity in her small face had lodged itself somewhere in his chest and was refusing to move. He opened his mouth. She fed him a spoonful, concentrating so hard her tongue poked out slightly between her lips, and some of it dribbled down his chin, which she wiped away with the sleeve of her nightgown without a second thought. Better? She asked. He didn't answer right away. He was staring at her, this tiny stranger who had climbed a step stool and dragged a bowl of soup down a hallway because she decided, all on her own, that a sick man shouldn't be alone. Nobody in his life, not his assistant, not his board members, not the string of people who called themselves friends when the cameras were rolling, had ever looked at him the way this child was looking at him now. Not with interest in what he could give them. Just concern. Simple, uncomplicated concern. Better, he finally said, and his voice cracked on the word. That was when Rosa came sprinting down the hallway, having woken to find her daughter's spot empty, panic written across her face until she reached the open door and saw the scene inside. Her daughter perched on the billionaire's bed, spoon in hand. Daniel Whitfield with tears he clearly wasn't accustomed to, running silently down his face. Amara. I am so sorry, Mr. Whitfield. She must have. Don't, Daniel said quickly, holding up a hand. Please. Don't apologize. This is the first time in longer than I can remember that anyone in this house has actually looked at me. Rosa froze in the doorway, unsure what to do with a sentence like that from a man like him. Sit, Daniel said, gesturing weakly to the chair by the bed. Please. Both of you. Just stay a minute. And though every instinct told her this crossed a line she wasn't supposed to cross, something in his face, something raw and exhausted and painfully human, made Rosa sit down anyway. Over the next several days, something shifted in the Whitfield house, quietly, the way real change tends to happen not with announcements, but in the small accumulation of ordinary moments nobody thought to name. Amara visited every morning before Rosa's shift officially started, climbing the step stool, delivering updates on how she'd slept, insisting on being the one to fluff his pillows even though she mostly just made them lopsided. Daniel, still weak but improving, began to look forward to those visits the way a man looks forward to sunrise after a long, cold night. He found himself laughing, actually laughing, not the practiced boardroom chuckle he performed for investors, at her insistence that soup cured everything, including, according to her, sad feelings. It was on the fourth day, when Amara asked an innocent question, that everything cracked open. Do you have a little girl? She asked, swinging her legs off the edge of the mattress. Like me? Daniel went very still. Rosa, who had just entered with a tray, froze in the doorway, because she had worked in that house for 2 years and had never once heard anyone ask him that question, and she watched his face do something she'd never seen it do, collapse, just slightly, like a wall finally giving way under pressure it had held for a long time. I did, he said quietly. A long time ago. The room went silent except for the soft tick of the antique clock on the mantel. She was 3, Daniel continued, and it was clear he hadn't spoken these words aloud in years, maybe ever, not fully. Her name was Grace. My wife, my ex-wife, and I lost her. An illness the doctors couldn't catch in time. I was in Singapore closing a deal when it happened. I wasn't there. His voice broke on the last 3 words, and he pressed a hand over his eyes. I was never there. Not for her, not for my marriage, not for my mother when she was dying 2 years later in a care facility I paid for, but never visited. I built an empire, and I lost everyone who mattered while I was building it. Rosa set the tray down slowly, her hand trembling slightly, understanding now the shape of the loneliness she'd witnessed for 2 years, but never understood. My brother Michael tried to tell me. Daniel went on. He said I was choosing buildings over people. We haven't spoken in 6 years. Not since our mother's funeral, where I showed up late because of a meeting. He let out a broken laugh with no humor in it at all. A meeting. I missed my own mother's funeral service, because of a merger. Amara, who had listened to all of this with the solemn attention children give to things they don't fully understand but feel deeply, reached out and put her small hand over his. "You can be my friend," she said simply. "And I can be like your Grace. A little bit." Daniel broke down completely then, sobbing in a way Rosa suspected he hadn't allowed himself to in years, maybe ever, while a 3-year-old patted his hand and told him it was okay to be sad, that sad feelings needed soup too. That was the twist nobody in that house saw coming. Not a scandal, not a business betrayal, but the quiet unveiling of a grief so large it had swallowed a man whole from the inside, hidden behind glass towers and headlines that only ever asked what he was worth, never what he had lost. The days that followed were different. Daniel began to heal, not just from the flu, which had mostly passed, but from something deeper that had been sitting untreated far longer than any virus. He asked Rosa to sit with him one evening, properly, not as employer and employee, but as two people who had accidentally stumbled into something honest. "Tell me about Amara's father," he said, and immediately caught himself. "You don't have to. I realize I've never asked you anything about your life in 2 years. I'm ashamed of that." Rosa considered deflecting, the way she always did, but something about the last few days had worn down the walls she usually kept up around her employer. "He left when Amara was 1. Said fatherhood wasn't what he signed up for. It's been just us since." "That must be hard." "It is. But she's the best thing that ever happened to me, so." Rosa shrugged, though her eyes were glassy. "We manage." Daniel was quiet for a long moment, turning something over in his mind. "I want to do something. Not charity, I don't mean it like that, and please don't hear it like that. I mean I want to actually be present. In whatever way makes sense. For you, for her. I haven't been present for anyone in 6 years, and I think I forgot how, and I think your daughter just reminded me." Rosa didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing, and Daniel didn't push. But 2 days later, still weak but insistent, he asked Claire to get his brother Michael on the phone. Claire, who had worked for him for 4 years and had never once seen him initiate contact with his brother, nearly dropped her tablet. The call, when it finally connected, was silent for almost 10 full seconds. "Daniel?" Michael's voice, cautious, disbelieving. "Is everything all right?" "No," Daniel admitted, his voice shaking. "Nothing's been all right in 6 years, Mike. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. For Mom's funeral. For every call I didn't return. For choosing the company over you, over everyone. I was scared of feeling things, so I just didn't. And a 3-year-old girl had to remind me what it looks like to actually show up for someone." There was a long pause, and then, quietly, Michael said, "I've been waiting 6 years for this call." They talked for 2 hours. It didn't fix everything. 6 years doesn't unravel in one phone call, but it was a beginning, the kind that matters more than people give it credit for. Word travels fast in a house full of staff, and within a week, everyone from the groundskeeper to the head chef had heard some version of the story. The sick billionaire, the maid's daughter, the soup. Most versions had been exaggerated into something closer to legend by the time they reached the kitchen. But Rosa noticed something true underneath the gossip. The house itself felt different. Warmer, somehow, though nothing about its marble floors or vaulted ceilings had changed. Daniel started coming down for meals again, not alone at the head of that absurdly long dining table, but in the kitchen, standing at the counter, talking to the chef about recipes, occasionally burning himself trying to help. He started asking staff about their families. He remembered names. He remembered birthdays. Small things, the kind of things that cost nothing and mean everything, and that he had simply never thought to offer before because no one had ever shown him they were owed. Amara, for her part, had adopted him fully into her small world. She called him Mr. Danny and insisted he attend her pretend tea parties, which he did, sitting cross-legged on the floor of the staff room in a $2,000 sweater, sipping imaginary tea from a plastic cup with the same seriousness he brought to billion-dollar negotiations. Rosa watched all of this with a complicated heart. Gratitude, mostly. Gratitude that her daughter had somehow cracked open something good in a man who badly needed it. But also fear, quiet and persistent, that this warmth was temporary. that men like Daniel Whitfield lived in a different world, one that eventually called them back, and that when it did, this small, strange, beautiful season would end, and her daughter's heart, so open and so trusting, would be the one left holding the loss. She said as much to him one evening, honestly, because 2 years of silence between them had apparently ended for good. "I need you to understand something," she told him, arms crossed, standing in the doorway of his study. "My daughter has already lost one man who was supposed to stay. I can't watch her lose another. If this is temporary for you, if you're going to go back to your towers and your meetings and forget about us in 6 months, tell me now, please, before she loves you any more than she already does." Daniel set down the papers he'd been holding and looked at her with an expression she hadn't seen from him before. Resolve. "I'm not going anywhere, Rosa. I've spent 6 years running from every person who ever tried to get close to me, and I am so tired of running. Your daughter climbed a step stool with a bowl of soup because she decided a stranger didn't deserve to be sick and alone. I don't intend to waste whatever she gave me." Months passed, and the Whitfield mansion, once a beautiful, cold monument to one man's success, slowly became something closer to a home. Daniel restructured parts of his company, stepping back from the constant travel, delegating in ways his board found alarming at first, and then, when quarterly numbers stayed strong, simply accepted as the new normal. He started spending real time with Michael, flying out for weekends, meeting his brother's kids, his own niece and nephew, for the first time in years. The reconciliation wasn't perfect. There were still hard conversations, old wounds that needed more than one phone call to heal. But the door, once sealed shut, was open now, and both brothers were walking through it slowly, deliberately, the way people do when they've learned the cost of letting things close. He also began quietly funding a program through a local children's hospital, not with a press release, not with his name plastered across a wing, but anonymously, in memory of Grace, for families who needed help affording care for sick children the way his family once hadn't been able to help her in time. It didn't undo anything. Grief doesn't work that way. But it gave the loss somewhere to go besides silence. And Amara simply kept being Amara. She grew an inch, lost a tooth, decided at one point that she wanted to be a doctor who makes soup, which Daniel declared to be the most sensible career plan he'd ever heard. She still visited him most mornings, though these days it was less about checking if he was sick and more about telling him elaborate, meandering stories about her stuffed rabbit's adventures, which he listened to with the same focus he once reserved for company earnings calls. Rosa watched her daughter and her employer build something neither of them had words for yet, and slowly, carefully, let herself stop waiting for it to end. It wasn't all smooth. 6 months in, a journalist from a gossip outlet caught wind of the reclusive billionaire's mysterious new home life and ran a speculative piece full of half-truths, painting Rosa as an opportunist and Daniel as a man being manipulated. The article spread fast, the way ugly things do, and for a few days, the warmth in that house curdled into something tense and frightened. Rosa, humiliated and afraid for her daughter, offered to resign. "It'll be easier," she said, not meeting his eyes. "For your reputation. For your business." Daniel didn't accept the resignation. Instead, he did something he hadn't done in years. He gave an interview, on his own terms, and told the truth. He talked about Grace, about his mother, about the 6 years he'd spent building an empire, while the people who loved him drifted away one by one. He talked about a 3-year-old with a bowl of soup who reminded him what showing up actually looked like. He didn't romanticize it, didn't make it a headline-grabbing love story. He simply told the truth, plainly, and let the public decide what to do with it. Most of them, it turned out, didn't want gossip. They wanted exactly what he'd given them, an honest, human story about grief and second chances. The narrative shifted almost overnight. And Rosa, watching him defend her and her daughter publicly without hesitation, without calculation, understood finally that whatever this was, it wasn't temporary. A year after that first bowl of soup, Daniel asked Rosa to sit with him in the garden, the one that had sat mostly unused for years because no one in that house had ever had a reason to enjoy it. "I'm not good at this," he admitted, turning a small velvet box over in his hands, not opening it yet. I've spent so long being good at boardrooms and bad at everything that actually matters. But I know that I love you. Both of you. I love the family you didn't know you were giving me when your daughter walked into my room with a bowl of soup she could barely carry. I'm not asking because it's convenient or because it looks good in a headline. I'm asking because for the first time in 6 years, I know exactly what I want, and it isn't another tower with my name on it. Rosa, tears in her eyes, thought of her daughter's small, insistent question in that hallway so long ago, who's taking care of him? And understood, finally, that the answer had become all three of them taking care of each other.
She said yes.
The wedding was small, deliberately so, no press, no towers of flowers flown in from overseas, just family. Michael stood beside his brother as best man, something neither of them would have believed possible 2 years earlier. The chef made the food. The groundskeeper, moved to tears, insisted on personally tending the garden for the occasion. Amara, for now, wore a smaller version of a red dress and insisted on carrying a bowl, empty, this time decorative, but she carried it down the aisle anyway, unwilling to let go of the object that had started everything, small hands gripping it the same fierce, determined way they had that first morning. Daniel watched her walk, watched Rosa follow behind her, and thought of Grace, allowing himself, for the first time, to feel that particular grief sit beside this particular joy without either one canceling the other out. That was the lesson it had taken him 35 years and one toddler's soup to learn, that love doesn't erase loss. It just makes room beside it. People ask Daniel sometimes, in the rare interviews he still gives, what changed him. They expect a story about a business failure, a health scare, some dramatic reckoning befitting a man of his stature. He always tells them the truth. It was a bowl of soup, carried by a 3-year-old who didn't know or care what he was worth, only that he was alone and shouldn't be. We spend our whole lives, he says, building things we think will prove we matter. Companies, fortunes, reputations. And none of it means anything if there's no one who'll climb a stepstool for you when you're sick. My daughter taught me that before I even knew she'd become my daughter. Amara, older now, still makes soup when anyone in the house is sick, badly mostly, since her cooking skills haven't quite caught up to her heart, and still insists on delivering it herself, no exceptions, family rule. And Rosa, when she thinks back to that morning she woke to find her daughter's spot in the staff room empty, still feels a small, quiet awe at what her little girl did without being asked, without understanding the world she was walking into, simply because she'd seen someone hurting and decided that was reason enough to help. That's the moral of it, really. You don't need money, or power, or permission to change someone's life. Sometimes all it takes is showing up, soup in hand, heart wide open for someone the rest of the world forgot to check on. If this story moved you even a little, that's exactly why I wanted to share it. If you enjoyed it, hit like, subscribe for more stories like this one, and share it with someone who might need the reminder today that showing up for people is never a small thing. Thank you for staying until the end. I'll see you in the next story.